When my daughter got married, I smiled for every wedding photo. I hugged her. I shook my new son-in-law's hand. And I pretended everything was perfect because there was one thing. I hadn't told either of them. 3 months before the wedding, my late father left me something that changed my life forever. Not a few $1,000s, not a house, not even a business. He left me nearly $12 million. And before anyone asks, no, my daughter had absolutely no idea. I kept it secret for one simple reason. Money changes people. I've seen it happen too many times. People who ignored you suddenly become family. People who never called suddenly want dinner. People who never cared suddenly start caring a little too much. So I made myself one promise. No one would hear about that inheritance until I was absolutely certain they loved me, not my bank account. At first, that decision felt almost unnecessary. My daughter Claire had always been the kindest person I knew. She worked as a pediatric nurse in Columbus, Ohio. She'd spent most of her 20s taking care of sick children instead of chasing expensive vacations or luxury cars. She never asked me for money. Not once. When her fiancé, Evan, came into the picture, I wanted to like him. Honestly, I tried. He was confident, funny, well-dressed, the kind of man everyone seemed to enjoy being around. He worked in commercial real estate, always talking about investments, opportunities, building wealth. Nothing unusual, at least. That's what I kept telling myself. Then one evening, about 6 weeks before the wedding, we were sitting on my back porch drinking coffee. Claire went inside to answer a phone call. For the first time, it was just Evan and me. He looked around my backyard, smiled, and asked something that caught me completely off guard. So, your father was pretty successful, wasn't he? I nodded. He did all right. Evan leaned back. Must have left quite an estate. The question sounded casual, almost harmless, but something about the way he watched my face made every alarm bell in my head start ringing. I laughed it off. Not really. We weren't close. He smiled, but it wasn't disappointment I saw. It looked more like he was calculating something. And that's when, for the very first time, I started wondering whether meeting my daughter had really been the luckiest thing that had ever happened to him, or simply the most profitable. A few days after that conversation, I tried convincing myself I was overthinking it. Maybe Evan was just making small talk. Maybe I was becoming one of those overprotective fathers who saw danger where there wasn't any. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But then, little things started happening. Claire began calling me more often. Not because she needed anything, she just sounded different, less excited, more distracted. One Sunday afternoon, she came over by herself. Evan was supposedly meeting a client. We sat in the kitchen drinking coffee like we always had. At one point, she smiled and said, "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course." She looked down at her cup. "How important do you think a prenup is?" That question surprised me. I shrugged. "It depends." "On what?" "On whether two people are protecting each other or protecting themselves from each other." She didn't answer. Instead, she quietly stirred her coffee. Then she said something I wasn't expecting. "Evan thinks they're insulting." I nodded slowly. "And what do you think?" She hesitated. "I don't know anymore." That sentence stayed with me long after she left, because Claire had never been indecisive. If something was bothering her, it meant there was already a much bigger problem underneath. A week later, I accidentally overheard something I was never supposed to hear. The wedding venue had asked me to stop by and approve the final seating arrangement. Claire was running late, so I arrived first. As I walked toward the reception hall, I heard voices coming from one of the private conference rooms. The door wasn't completely closed. I recognized Evan immediately. He was laughing. "Trust me, once we're married, everything changes." Another man laughed. "You sure her old man isn't hiding money?" Evan answered without missing a beat. "If he is, I'll find out." They both laughed. Then Evan said something that made my stomach turn. "I didn't spend 2 years building this relationship to stay broke." I froze. For a second, I honestly thought I had misunderstood him. Maybe he was joking. Maybe it was sarcasm. But the silence that followed said otherwise. I quietly stepped away before anyone noticed me. The entire drive home, I couldn't stop hearing those words. I didn't spend 2 years building this relationship. Not I fell in love. Not. I want to make her happy. No. He talked about my daughter like she was an investment. That night, I walked downstairs, opened the safe hidden behind my late father's old bookshelf, and stared at the inheritance documents. For the first time, I realized keeping my father's money a secret might not be enough. Because if Evan really was after my family's future, then sooner or later, he was going to make his move. And I decided I was going to let him, because sometimes the fastest way to expose someone's true intentions is to let them believe they're winning. The wedding day arrived, and if you looked at the photos, you'd think it was perfect. The weather was beautiful. Claire looked happier than I'd ever seen her. The ceremony was elegant. People laughed, people cried, even I did. Watching my little girl walk down the aisle was one of the hardest and happiest moments of my life. For a while, I almost forgot every concern I'd had about Evan. I wanted to believe that maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe he'd simply made a few careless jokes. Maybe I had judged him too quickly. Then came the reception. About halfway through the evening, Evan walked over with 2 glasses of whiskey. Mind if I steal the father of the bride for a minute? I smiled. Sure. We stepped outside onto the terrace. Music from the ballroom echoed softly behind us. For a few minutes, we talked about completely ordinary things. The honeymoon, his work, the weather. Then, almost effortlessly, he changed the subject. So, have you ever thought about downsizing? I looked at him. What do you mean? Your house is beautiful, but it's probably worth a fortune now. I shrugged. I've lived there for 30 years. He smiled. Still, you could sell it, buy something smaller, invest the rest. There it was again. Money. Always money. I took a sip of whiskey. You seem to think about investments a lot. He laughed. Occupational hazard. Then he looked directly into my eyes. You know, families build wealth by thinking ahead. It sounded like advice, but somehow it felt like a question, almost as if he was waiting for me to reveal something. I simply smiled. My father used to say, if people know how much you have, they'll eventually decide how much you owe them. For the first time that evening, Evan stopped smiling, just for a second. Then it came back. Smart man. A few hours later, the wedding ended. Everyone hugged. Everyone celebrated. And before Claire left for their honeymoon, she hugged me tighter than usual. I love you, Dad. I love you too. She whispered something I'll never forget. Thank you for always protecting me. At the time, I thought she meant protecting her growing up. I had no idea she'd soon need protection from the man she'd just married. 3 weeks passed. The honeymoon ended. Life slowly returned to normal. Then, one Tuesday morning, my phone rang. It was Claire. She sounded nervous. Dad, can I ask you something? Anything. She hesitated. Evan wants us to move into your neighborhood. I frowned. Why? He says it'll make it easier to help you as you get older. I almost laughed. I was 58, healthy, still running 3 miles every morning. I didn't need help, Claire continued. He also thinks maybe one day we could renovate your house together. Renovate. Interesting choice of words. Because nobody renovates a house they don't expect to own someday. That afternoon, I drove home, opened the safe again, and made a decision. If Evan wanted to know how much money I had, I'd let him believe. I had almost nothing left, because sometimes the quickest way to expose greed isn't by showing wealth. It's by making someone think their payday has disappeared. The next morning, I called my attorney, not because I wanted to change my will, because I wanted to protect it. We spent nearly 2 hours going over every account, every investment, every document my father had left behind. When we finished, he looked at me and smiled. You planning something? I smiled back. I just want to know who I'm really dealing with. 3 days later, Claire invited me over for dinner. It was the first time I'd been to their new house since the honeymoon. Nothing fancy. A quiet little place, about 20 minutes outside Columbus. When I walked in, everything looked normal. Claire was cooking. Music was playing. Evan greeted me with a hug. Glad you made it. For the first half hour, we barely talked about anything important: football, work, the neighbors. Then, Claire stepped outside to answer a phone call from the hospital. It was just Evan and me. Again. He leaned back in his chair. "So, how's retirement treating you?" "Can't complain." "You still living off your pension?" "Mostly." He nodded, then casually asked, "What happened with your father's estate?" I shrugged. "It wasn't nearly what people imagined." He looked surprised. "Really?" "After taxes, legal fees, old debts, there wasn't much left." I deliberately stopped there. I watched his face. For just a split second, something changed. It wasn't disappointment, it was frustration, like someone watching a winning lottery ticket blow away in the wind. He recovered quickly. "Well, money isn't everything." I smiled. "No, it isn't." Claire came back inside. The conversation ended, but I already had what I came for. The next few weeks, something fascinating happened. Evan stopped calling. No more invitations to lunch. No more offers to help around the house. No more questions about retirement. Nothing. It was like someone had flipped a switch. Claire noticed it too. "Dad, he's been so busy lately." I nodded. "I'm sure he has." But deep down, I wasn't thinking about work. I was thinking about motive. Then, late one Friday afternoon, my old friend Sam called. "You've got a minute?" "Always." "I found something." Those 4 words made my stomach tighten. "What is it?" Sam lowered his voice. "I don't think Evan chose Claire by accident." The room suddenly felt smaller. "What do you mean?" "I've been looking through public records. And there are 2 other women." I froze. Women. They were both engaged to him. Years apart. Both engagements ended right after large family inheritances disappeared. Silence. Neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked the only question that mattered. "Do you have proof?" Sam answered immediately. "Oh, I've got a lot more than proof." Sam asked me to meet him at the same diner we'd been going to for years. He already had a folder waiting on the table. No dramatic speech, no build-up. He simply pushed it toward me. "I think you should read this yourself." I opened the folder. The first page showed a smiling couple, Evan standing beside a woman I'd never seen before. Her name was Melissa Harper. They'd been engaged almost 5 years earlier. According to Sam, Melissa's grandfather had owned several apartment buildings outside Cleveland. A few months before their wedding, he passed away. Melissa expected to inherit part of the estate. Instead, everything went to charity. The engagement ended less than 6 weeks later. I turned the page. Another woman, Rachel Simmons. Different city, different year, same story. Her parents had been preparing to sell a successful construction company. Evan dated her for almost 2 years. The sale fell through. 3 months later, the relationship was over. I slowly closed the folder. "That's not proof." Sam nodded. "I know. But now look at the dates." He slid another sheet across the table. Every relationship began shortly before a major financial event. Every breakup happened shortly after the money disappeared. None of it was illegal, but all of it painted the same picture. Evan didn't chase women. He chased opportunity. I sat there quietly, trying to convince myself there had to be another explanation. Then Sam reached into his briefcase one last time. I almost forgot. He handed me a business card. A private financial consultant. On the back, someone had written one sentence: "Assets first, feelings second." I frowned. "What is this?" Sam leaned forward. The consultant remembers Evan. He came in asking how family trusts worked. My heart skipped a beat. "When was this?" Sam looked down at his notes. "About a month before he proposed to Claire." Neither of us spoke. Outside the diner, cars rolled past. People laughed. Life went on. Inside, everything suddenly felt very quiet. I looked at Sam. "What would you do?" He didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said, "I wouldn't accuse him. Not yet. I'd let him think. His plan is still working." That advice stayed with me because deep down, I knew something. If Evan believed the money was gone, he'd eventually lose interest. But if he somehow discovered the inheritance still existed, he'd make another move. And this time, I'd be ready. 3 nights later, Claire called. She sounded excited. "Dad, Evan has a surprise for you." I smiled. "What kind of surprise?" "He won't tell me. He said it'll help our whole family." The moment I hung up, I didn't feel excited. I felt prepared because by then I already knew every generous offer from Evan came with a price tag. I just didn't know how expensive this one was going to be. 3 days later, Claire called again. "You have to come over Saturday." "Why?" "Evan planned something. He says it's for the whole family." I smiled. "I'll be there." The moment I hung up, I already knew this wasn't about family. It never was. Saturday arrived. Their backyard looked beautiful. A grill was smoking. Music played quietly. A few neighbors had been invited. Nothing felt unusual. Until lunch was over. Evan stood up, tapped his glass with a spoon. "I just wanted to thank everyone for supporting Claire and me." Everyone applauded. Then he looked directly at me, and especially Frank. "You've always been there for us." I smiled politely. He continued, "I've actually been working on something that I think could benefit our entire family." There it was. Claire looked surprised. "You never told me that." Evan laughed. "I wanted it to be a surprise." He disappeared inside. A minute later, he came back carrying a leather folder. My heart didn't race. It slowed down because suddenly everything made sense. He handed me a few printed pages. "It's just an idea." I looked at the title, "The Coleman Family Legacy Trust." "Interesting, very interesting." Evan sat beside me. "The idea is simple. We create one family trust. Everything stays protected. If anything ever happens, there's no probate, no legal headaches, no unnecessary taxes." Several people nodded. It sounded smart, responsible, even generous. Claire smiled. "That actually sounds nice." Evan looked at her. "I told you your dad would understand." Then he turned back to me. "If we set this up now, future generations will be protected." I slowly turned another page. Everything looked professional. Charts, legal language, financial projections. Honestly, if I hadn't spent 2 hours with my attorney a few weeks earlier, I probably would have believed every word. Then I noticed something. Near the bottom, in small print, one sentence, "Managing Trustee, Evan Carter." I didn't react. I simply kept reading. Inside, I was smiling. Not because I was impressed, because he'd finally shown me exactly what he wanted. Control, not ownership. Control, which was even more dangerous. I closed the folder, looked at him. "This must have taken a lot of work." He smiled. "It did." "I just want to protect this family." I nodded. "I appreciate that." For a moment, his shoulders relaxed. He thought I was buying it. Then I asked one simple question. "So, why are you the trustee instead of Claire?" The smile disappeared, just for a second. Then he recovered. "It was only a draft. We can change anything." I nodded again. "Good, because my attorney will want to rewrite almost all of it." The backyard went completely quiet. Evan forced another smile. "Of course. I expected that, but I could see it." His jaw tightened. His fingers gripped the edge of the folder. That wasn't the reaction of a man discussing paperwork. That was the reaction of someone watching months of planning beginning to fall apart. As I drove home that evening, my phone buzzed. It was Sam. "I've got something you're going to want to hear." I answered immediately. "What is it?" His voice was unusually serious. "I found out who actually wrote that trust." I frowned. "I thought Evan did." Sam paused. "No. He paid a law firm that specializes in high net worth estate transfers." I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. Then Sam said the one sentence that changed everything. "And Frank, you're not the first father they've used this exact trust on." I pulled into Sam's driveway. Less than 30 minutes later, he was already waiting in the garage. His laptop was open. Several folders covered the workbench. He looked up. "You need to see this." He clicked on a document. "The law firm Evan hired has represented several wealthy family trusts." I nodded. "That's not illegal." "No." Sam agreed. "It isn't." He clicked again. "But look at one particular case. A family from Cincinnati, a retired businessman, nearly $8 million in assets." Sam opened another page. "The son-in-law convinced the father to transfer everything into a family trust." What happened? Sam didn't answer immediately. Instead, he handed me a newspaper clipping. 2 years later, the father lost control of nearly every investment, perfectly legal, technically, but devastating. The trustee had complete authority over the assets. The father spent years in court trying to recover what he'd built. I slowly put the paper down. So Evan copied the idea. Sam nodded. Looks that way. But that's not the interesting part. He opened one final file. 3 phone calls. I frowned. What phone calls? Evan contacted that same law firm. Before he proposed to Claire, I stared at him. You're sure? Sam slid the billing records across the table. The dates didn't lie. Months before there was even an engagement ring. Evan had already been asking lawyers about family trusts, about inheritance protection, about elderly parents with significant assets. None of them knew my name, but somehow he already knew. Someone in Claire's family was worth planning around. I leaned back in my chair. For the first time, I stopped asking myself whether Evan loved my daughter. Instead, I started asking whether he'd chosen her. That thought made me sick. Sam broke the silence. So, what now? I looked at the folder, then at my phone. I don't confront him. Sam smiled. Good, because he'll deny everything. I know. I let him think. I'm considering the trust. Sam raised an eyebrow. You really think he'll take the bait? I smiled. He already has. The next morning, I called Evan. Hey, I've been thinking about your proposal. His voice instantly became more energetic. Yeah? I'd like to sit down. Just the two of us. And go through every page. There was a brief pause. Then he laughed. I'd love that. How about Tuesday? Perfect. When the call ended, I looked at the family photo sitting on my desk. Claire was smiling, completely unaware that the 2 men she trusted most were about to have a conversation that would determine whether her marriage survived its first year. As I picked up my truck keys, my phone buzzed one more time. It was Claire, just one sentence. Dad, I found something in Evan's office. Can I come over tonight? My heart immediately sank because whatever she'd found had scared her enough to call me first, not her husband. That evening, Claire arrived just after 7. She looked exhausted, not angry, not crying, just drained. The moment she walked inside, I knew something had happened. She sat at the kitchen table, reached into her purse, and placed a single envelope in front of me. I found this inside Evan's home office. I looked at the envelope. There was no return address, only one logo, the same law firm Sam had shown me the night before. I slowly opened it. Inside was a draft engagement agreement, not ours, not even recent. It was dated almost 4 years earlier. Another woman's name, Melissa Harper, the same woman. From Sam's investigation, my heart started pounding. Claire whispered, I didn't know who she was, but I remembered the name after hearing you talk. I turned another page. The agreement had handwritten notes. Someone had circled one sentence. Family assets should remain under unified management. Beside it, one word was written in blue ink. Priority. Claire looked at me. I asked Evan about it. What did he say? He claimed it was just old paperwork. I nodded. And did you believe him? She didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her bag again. This time, she pulled out a small notebook. It gets worse. She opened it. Every page contained dates, phone calls, meetings, appointments. At first, it looked like an ordinary planner. Then I noticed certain names were highlighted. Financial advisor, estate attorney, trust consultant. Every appointment had happened before he proposed, not after, before. Claire's voice started shaking. He wasn't planning our future. He was planning yours. Neither of us spoke. I kept turning pages. Then I stopped. One page had only one sentence written across the top. Meet Frank alone. Underneath, 3 bullet points. Gain trust. Discuss retirement. Introduce family trust. I closed the notebook. Very slowly, for months. I'd wondered whether I was imagining things, whether I was becoming paranoid. Now, I finally had my answer. This wasn't manipulation born during the marriage. It had started long before the wedding. Claire buried her face in her hands. I loved him, Dad. I know. I thought he loved me too. I walked around the table, put my hand on her shoulder. This isn't your fault. The best manipulators don't look dangerous. She looked up at me. What do we do now? I took a deep breath. We don't argue. We don't accuse. We let him believe he still has one last chance. She frowned. What do you mean? I looked at the notebook, then at the unsigned trust documents. I think Evan still believes I'm eventually going to tell him where the inheritance is, and when he asks, he'll finally stop pretending. Claire stared at me for a long moment, then slowly nodded. For the first time, we weren't reacting to Evan anymore. We were waiting for him to make the mistake he didn't even realize he was about to make. 3 days later, I invited Evan over, just the two of us. No Claire, no lawyers, no Sam, just coffee and one last conversation. He arrived right on time, confident, relaxed, almost cheerful. He looked around my kitchen and smiled. So, have you made a decision? I poured him a cup of coffee, then sat down across from him. I have. His smile grew wider. I figured you would. He slid the trust documents toward me. I didn't touch them. Instead, I asked him one question. Evan, if there wasn't any inheritance, would you still have married Claire? He laughed softly. Frank, that's a strange question. Is it? He looked down at the papers, then back at me. I love your daughter. I nodded. I didn't ask if you loved her. I asked if you would have married her. The room fell silent. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he leaned back in his chair. You really want the truth? Yes, he sighed. I probably wouldn't have looked twice. There it was. No anger, no shouting, just one calm sentence. The truth, he continued. People marry for all kinds of reasons. Love, status, security. I was just being practical. At that exact moment, the kitchen door opened. Evan turned around. His face instantly lost all color. Claire was standing there. She had heard everything, every single word. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply looked at him like she was seeing a complete stranger. Quietly, she took off her wedding ring, walked over to the table, and placed it right on top of the trust documents. I was never your investment. Her voice never cracked. It was calm, almost heartbreaking. You were supposed to be my husband. Evan stood up. Claire. Let me explain. She shook her head. No. For months, I kept looking for the man I fell in love with. Today, I realized he never existed. She turned around, walked toward the front door, then stopped. Without looking back, she said one last thing. My grandfather left us a lesson, not just an inheritance. He taught me that character is worth more than money. Then she walked out. The door closed. The house became completely silent. Evan looked at me. For the first time, he had nothing left to say. He slowly gathered the unsigned papers, folded them, and quietly left. That was the last time I ever saw him. 6 months later, Claire's marriage was officially annulled. She moved into a small apartment, went back to school, and slowly rebuilt her life. As for the inheritance, I eventually placed part of it into a protected trust for her future, one that no husband, no stranger, and no manipulator would ever be able to touch. Sometimes people ask me if I regret keeping the money a secret. My answer is always the same, not for 1 second, because that secret didn't destroy my daughter's marriage. It revealed what her marriage truly was. Money doesn't create character, it exposes it. And sometimes, the greatest gift a parent can give is not wealth. It's enough time for the truth to reveal itself. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy powerful Reddit-style family stories with shocking twists and meaningful endings, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. We'll see you in the next Reddit case file.